The first question we have here, could you share your experience on what's been the most common challenge slowing down sustainability strategy execution? What are you hearing from customers at the moment?
I think if I had to choose one, because it's a biggie by itself, it's this endless business loop unless some intervention happens. And the loop sounds something like this. We're a really small sustainability team. We have big aspirations. We're trying to fight for funding. Well, when you write that business case, you know, if you're, let's say, a multi-million-dollar function, for that business, if you sat across from C-suites members, from board members, you know the pressure to make the right investment at the right time for the right reason is immense. And so I think about when I was at Xero starting our ESG function and team from the ground up, at the end of the day, the CEO, no matter how much he or she may be passionate, we have to make sure that that business case is as solid as it gets, and we are partners in that. And so, for example, if your organization needs to make the trade-off of either we spend $5 million launching in 5 new countries or $5 million decarbonizing our supply chain, we need to make sure that at the end of the day, that argument is just as compelling, if not more, to make sure that we're making the right decisions for the business. Because if we make the right decisions for the business now, the business will only get bigger and have more resources to do more good down the line. And so I think when we get into that scenario, that's where data comes in.
Yep.
The data tells you not only where am I at, let's say with my carbon emissions, but helps you decide, well, if we're a mining business, or we're an energy business, or we're a software business, how hard do we want to go on pushing ourselves on these matters? And that's the first part where data comes in, forming that strategy. And then how are we actually going to get there? Well, we've agreed on SBTI targets through to 2030. How am I actually going to reduce scope 3 by 50%? Another huge data challenge. Well, let's say we use guesstimations to figure out where that baseline is for today, but that could be a little more accurate, but we'll take it as it is today. Then that helps identify impact, but then operationalizing it. When you actually go from the top back down into the functions, how do we make sure that every cross-functional leader is just as enthusiastic, motivated, and incentivized, as Kathleen mentioned, to actually get the work done? And so I think data helps at every step. Top-down alignment helps at every step. But being crystal clear on why you want to do things is the only way, I think, to avoid a checklist mentality.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's the biggest one.
Yeah, and it's clear that data is going to be a key enabler for helping people measure their progress and hopefully make meaningful progress towards their goals. Where do you see that organizations are at the moment with that, you know, the key foundational piece, which is having the right data to make these decisions?
I think as someone who loves data, there's never enough data. And to the best of my internet trawling abilities, there still isn't enough for my liking.
Yeah.
But we'll take what's out there. I think, you know, for businesses to translate a strategy or an ambition into very specific priorities with very specific outcomes that they expect, with very specific timelines by which they hope to achieve it, I think that operationalizing and activating the program's efforts needed to satisfy and fulfill the strategies is the hardest part. I think environment is a great example, right? Yeah. Unlike other business processes, you set sales targets a year, 3 years maybe into the future. People are working the opposite with climate. You're setting 2030 goals and some have to figure out what you do today.
Yep.
So I think it is a real mind flip. But if we can break down just like any other challenge into small enough parts, no problem is that complex if you break it down into simple enough parts.
Yep.
And when you actually get started, you might realize things that only make the cycle go faster. So for example, hey, you know, we had this theory that if we went carbon neutral at Xero, we knew from data that that was the one topic our employees were the most passionate about.
Yeah.
You know, and so even though we're a low footprint, we did it for our employees. And because they're a core part of our stakeholder base, but also they're passionate. They're the reason we are successful as a company. And so we did it. We went carbon neutral in a couple of months, right? That was a stakeholder decision that was right for Xero. That wasn't a best practice or checklist that anyone could have given you. And so I think once we started testing that, we got great feedback, sentiment from our staff. They were just so enthused about being part of the brand. That was the ROI we needed.
Yep.
And every single initiative after that, if we had the right justification and we could prove and get enough points on the board, it just got easier and faster. And so it's not to say it was easy by any means, but I think that patience of educating others, the strategic thinking of why and who matters, why does this matter to whom, the data-driven nature to have an argument that no one can basically turn down because it has an objective basis by which you can negotiate with other functions and prioritize yourself so you do maybe become part of BAU instead of off to the side. So I think that activation plan requires all of those things, but obviously bringing together, especially larger organizations, all with different cycles and priorities across functions, it's a hard feat. So I think that's why a lot of organizations' strategy takes them less time than really just getting the organization on board to do it.
Making those strategic investments is probably a key problem that many organizations are facing. Which sustainability investment to make, which initiative to fund, and things like that. You both mentioned that the small sustainability teams trying to transform an entire organization can be challenging, and we see underinvestment in those teams. Kath, how have you seen organizations embed sustainability into their decision-making process? Because that's really where it needs to be. It can't be something off to the side. It needs to be embedded in everything these organizations do. Yeah. What are some examples on where it's worked well, and where are some of the opportunities to improve?
Absolutely. The goal of any well-functioning, self-sustaining sustainability strategy and program would be that it is as dispersed and owned by other parts of the business as much as possible. And we've already talked a bit, both of us today, about the importance of data as the driver to that. But leaving aside the need to be able to track and break down sustainability goals in order for other parts of the business to pick it up. What's really fascinating about the examples that we have where organisations have embedded sustainability within various business processes is very clearly those other business processes have taken on the ownership and the creation of that check and balance themselves. So very rarely do we see a centralised sustainability or strategy team being close enough to the ways in which processes and ways of working actually occur within other parts of the business in order to be able to influence that really successfully. So the call to arms would be, if there are business processes and they're likely to be in technology, they're likely to be in risk, and they're also really likely to be in brand and marketing, that already ask questions themselves in their own way for their own purposes around either the internal or external impact of a decision being made, if there's a key stakeholder outcome, so particularly for the finance team, who will often be thinking about and always seem to be working towards the external reporting of data and other information. Empowering those leaders and those functions to understand how to best pick up sustainability themselves is the best way to do it. But as we've talked about, we can't ask them to do that voluntarily or out of the goodness of their hearts. It has to be something that is seen as core to their own decision making and their own processes. Yeah. So it's the empowerment piece, but it's also the support for those people as you empower them, that they understand and can be really reassured that the decisions or the changes that they're making to address sustainability is exactly what their business wants them to do. Yep. And when they're successful at it, they will be rewarded and recognised for that.
So I suppose that accountability is a key factor that organisations need to get in place in order to make some progress. Yep. One of the challenges, and you've both mentioned it, is lack of data. You can't make someone accountable for something, give them a KPI unless there's data to support that. Yep. Many organisations are measuring things once a year, particularly around carbon. How do we sort of break that deadlock of no one's accountable for this strategy, therefore we're not making progress? Does it come back to just getting the data in place and automating as much as possible? How do we improve that cycle time to make people more accountable and more empowered, therefore, to deliver on this? Any ideas on what organisations could do?
I can give it a go. I can start. It's a very big question.
Sorry.
And everybody should be listening, because if I had the watertight answer to that, but I tell you what, I'd be certainly shopping it around to as many organisations as possible, because it is absolutely, and we've talked about this, the catch-22. The importance of data and database decision cannot be underestimated. Of course, none of us would say that we would expect an organisation to make any decisions about either investment or a KPI for an individual or a team without having the right and robust data strategy and access to that data behind it. Having said that, we could be waiting a long time for us to have all of those data ducks in a row, for want of a better term. So a strong recommendation is to think absolutely, and for most organisations it's likely to be carbon and climate change as an issue, which parts of your sustainability data set are most close to this utopia of being defensible, easily pulled out of your data systems wherever they are, potentially, and we're seeing a lot of tools available, although as you pointed out, Anne, it's not always easy to understand which tool could be best fit for purpose. But starting with an ESG metric that is A, meaningful for your business, B, is probably closest to being able to be realised in this way.
Yep.
Available in a timely way, verifiable. And starting with those metrics and allocating those back to teams is the best way to do it. And there will be some resistance to it, of course, and everybody's feedback is really important along the way. But at the end of that decision, at the end of that decision-making process, the business is hopefully in a position to say, given how important these metrics are to our organisation's performance over time, given how certain we are with some variability, of course, that this data is verifiable, it's easily available, it's something that we can share internally and externally, this is now a commitment we need to make.
Yep.
That we're going to create an internal and external measurement on this particular metric. And if it is only that one ESG metric that your organisation manages to get to that point with in the short term, that's still an amazing outcome, and you'll learn a lot along the way about the other ESG metrics and how to do the same.
Yeah, fantastic. So
I'm happy to build on that.
Yeah,
yes.
go for it.
I think depending on where you're on the tech and sustainability side, I'll try to give maybe a before and after that I hope that companies can achieve. I think the before being now, let's say you're spending months asking procurement, facilities to dig up hundreds of invoices from every email they've gotten from their thousands of suppliers, so you can ship that all to your environmental consultants so they can munge it in Excel for months and then you get your report every year. It's a lot of humans and a lot of manual work.
Yeah.
Let's say the utopia could look something like this. How quickly do the data points you need to get into the tool that maybe then gives you that next level of insights? Let's say your EHS platform, your ERP platform, your name it, all the acronyms for all the enterprise tools you might be using. How quickly can it push data to somewhere else? Let's say 24 hours. All right, well, if in 24 hours from an event happening, I can get that information over, let's say, to my carbon footprint calculation software. Well, how long does it take that software to actually translate financial spend into emissions footprint? They could do it on the fly. So now wouldn't it be theoretically possible if we did find a great software that can give companies the reassurance that their methodology is good enough for public reporting, that it's as accurate as it can be, that's as honest as it can be, and they can get that fresh of insights with, let's say, 6 months to 12 months realistically of some IT integration work, activating a SaaS, a little bit of onboarding. In a year's time, it is potentially possible. We haven't vetted all the climate techs out there, so I won't say anything definitive. But in a year's time, how wonderful would it be if suddenly your team of 3 to 6 can chop off half of their workload for 6 months out of the year?
Yep.
And they reclaim that to invest in strategic initiatives. And while doing that, they have better data than they ever have in 48 hours freshness for any decision they need to make about their carbon footprint, for any function, project, resourcing cycle.
That'd be amazing.
It's getting close to possible, and some of our customers are already exploring these softwares especially. I think some of the hesitancy is more in, can they trust that the numbers, that the methodology in that tool is at the same grade as their environmental consultant would give them, so they can maintain their climate active certification, so they don't accidentally greenwash in some cases. And so I think that's one hesitancy I've seen for some making the leap.
Yeah, and it sounds like I know there's a lot of tools out there, and sustainability teams get bombarded with small startups and established organizations trying to sell them a tool that will solve all of their sustainability problems. This may be true, it may not be true. How do small sustainability teams that are generally non-technical sort of navigate the complexity of a tech ecosystem that claims to solve things, potentially they do or don't, and how do they figure out if they're going to integrate in with the broader ecosystem inside an organisation? Kath, do you want to have a go at
Go for sure on that one? It's a critical one for sustainability teams, and almost without exception, the sustainability leaders that we meet tell stories about the promise of technology and intuition, and even lots of emails from vendors explaining how different tools and solutions can help solve this problem. But that sustainability leader feeling really unable to confidently have the internal conversations he or she would need to have about this tool's applicability for their own specific sustainability strategy, because there are so many and the questions are so technically specific. We wouldn't advocate for necessarily building out that kind of tech ability or tech thinking within the sustainability team necessarily. Although we could have another discussion about what kinds of skills and capabilities sustainability teams are going to need into the future to deliver on sustainability, but we can have another live stream about that. In terms of where a sustainability team is today, thinking through the best next step forward regarding technology for sustainability, whether that's something we build internally or something we bring external to the organisation, really has to go through whatever existing processes the technology team has for vetting and understanding technology decisions.
Just like any other system they're going to install.
Absolutely. It will exist. The technology teams, small or big, will have a way in which they understand and vet and assess. They'll have a backlog. They'll have lots of other requests from other parts of the business. So the call to the sustainability leader is to understand how your technology team assesses fit-for-purpose tooling now and participate in that process in the way that tech teams will need you to do that so that they can provide that advice. It is a great idea to pick up the phone and call the person in the tech team. Absolutely, start there, but that can't be enough. Participating in the formal processes for understanding what's on the tech roadmap, how tech ideas are assessed and eventually included or not is critical for the sustainability.
So understanding the ways of working of the tech team, how they fund things, their funding cycles, all of this needs to play into that.
All of that.
When we talk to tech leaders, they're really excited about sustainability and want to help, but they generally don't really know what role they can play. Their minds always jump to how do we reduce the cloud emissions associated with our cloud compute, for instance. But in our experience, it's more of an opportunity for tech leaders to help the organisation be more sustainable, help with these initiatives, and data keeps coming up. What are some examples for tech leaders, Anne? How can they get involved? How should they be thinking about this opportunity?
I think having been both on the sustainability line of business as well as the tech development side, I think it's two very different expertises, and often there's not enough shared vocabulary or motivation to even really sit in it long enough together in the first place. So I'm sure all sustainability leaders reached out to their CTO, their CDO, CIO, CO. It's like, hey, I'm here, let's have a chat. But the difference between one good brainstorm versus actually partnering together in depth, I think is a different type of discussion. And so I think figuring out where at the top level of the business, we know for CTOs, folks on the product side, their budgets maybe aren't growing as fast as their ambitions. And with inflation, strain of supply chains, war on talent, there's a bunch of reasons why cost optimization has never been more important. How do they get the most bang for their buck? And so while technologists have all this pressure already, now there's another source of good ideas coming from the sustainability team about big things they can take on. And so how do we make sustainability initiatives BAU for a tech leader to evaluate, just like they would prioritizing anything else that's a hard call? Data, strong business case, et cetera, things we've been talking about. And so at Xero, one of the things that I realized was there are a bunch of small, medium businesses around the world that were our customers at that time, getting close to 3 million. And for the average small business, we did a lot of research about why aren't they taking action today for those that did? And we had a lot of insights at Xero just working as an SMB platform on the average life of a small business owner. They barely have enough time to keep the lights on. Nonetheless, go try out a new app to do something that would be a nice to have. And especially coming out of COVID. But we realized that environmental impact was really important to us. We had gone through our own journey, had learned some things ourselves. We knew the small business owner quite well and trying to translate the journey that we had been on ourselves into something that's practical, accessible, and fit for their needs. They aren't as complex as, let's say, the size of Xero, and so we had to do some of that customizing. But we said, this isn't our bread and butter. We don't build climate tech. But what we did know really well was financial spend data being built as an accounting platform. And so for those that understand spend-based emissions calculations, we thought it was a perfect opportunity. We can help our small businesses who are our customer base. Environment is extremely important to us. We kind of know the nuances of what to care about, how these things work. We knew how to build technology as a software company. But we realized that we had so many big things that we wanted to do. Internationalization, AI, ML. I was like, fair call, Chief Product Tech Officer. This isn't the time for you to invest millions of dollars, but maybe there's a quicker way to try this. And so then we worked with our developer relations ecosystem, our ecosystem of developers that built apps for the Xero marketplace using data from our APIs, like the bank transaction data that we had available for every small business that was on our platform. And so just by joining our marketplace, any customer could set up their account, have the data ported automatically, and they would have an emissions footprint without spending $30,000 in consulting fees or maybe 6 months of data pulling that they just couldn't afford. And so I think there are ways that not only is it about building champions across the business, but back to experimentation quickly, innovation quickly. That was a low-cost way. We didn't have to build the tech ourselves.
Yeah.
We just had to give a lot of support and advisory to help our app partners join our marketplace. But through that, we were able to bring on climate techs from around the world, because it's hard to differentiate sometimes which one is better than the other. But we said, hey, let's invite them all, and let's see which ones our customers respond to, which ones they get excited about. And then maybe we'll invest, more deeply, longer term. So that was the play that we took. We could have built the software ourselves, but for the organization, it didn't make sense. But with some willing helpers, myself coming from product management, some very enthusiastic climate tech partners around the world, we were able to build an ecosystem that's continuing to grow. And so I think for sustainability teams, that could have easily been a big idea. We're barely finishing our ESG reporting on time. Now you want to enable 3 million small, medium businesses to calculate their footprint in 30 minutes?
Yeah.
But when you actually break it down, what do we really need to do this? All right, we already got the data feeds, we already got app partners. Actually, we just need a little bit of advisory and some help from that team. It wasn't as hard as the return in terms of impact and value of the idea. And so I think it is worth for sustainability teams or tech teams to sit together long enough, if there is that top-down shared incentive, to really break the problems and opportunities down to a granular enough level to really assess the ROI. Because I think sometimes, the ROI ratios might surprise you.
Yeah. And the prioritization of sustainability is one of the key problems that we keep hearing from sustainability and tech teams. The tech teams are busy building the product that keeps the business operating and functioning. What are some of the tips for prioritizing sustainability? Having the standalone sustainability initiative, is that going to get funded by the business, or are teams better off embedding sustainability into existing initiatives and trying to bake it in to everything that we do? What are your thoughts on that, Kath?
I think absolutely there's a place for both. Obviously, funded programs that are sustainability headlined and sustainability owned. But I think, as we've said several times today, we will get to the point where these tough calls are made, are needed to be made, and that won't always be an easy position for a sustainability team to be in. So absolutely thinking about ways in which already slated initiatives, already budgeted and funded initiatives, but also those that are coming in front of capital committees and others, and how those initiatives may open the door for some sustainability priorities, this acceleration of sustainability strategy. And a sustainability leader doesn't need a whole lot of other technical or functional knowledge to be able to do that. They need the awareness, and they need to be brought in on the discussion. So there'll be processes already today, particularly for the large pieces of work, which are the most risky from a sustainability perspective and potentially the most exciting opportunity for driving sustainability. There'll be internal processes already for assessing whether this is a good idea or not, for considering all of the ways in which an investment or a good idea might have value, not just for the business case it's presenting in that specific first step, but how anything that we invest in or build in might have other value drivers across the business. Who else will benefit from an investment like this? And all too often, we're not seeing sustainability as a consideration there, either as a risk, but also, as I've said, an opportunity driver as well. So it's, again, depending on where organisations are, there is work to be done, but it doesn't need to be incredibly complex or challenging or expensive work. All it really does take, and I don't want to simplify this too much, absolutely, because this is obviously, we're talking about change for organisations, which is never easy. But processes like this that already exist, about understanding which horses to back, where to put capital, what questions need to be asked and considered, are absolutely right for integrating sustainability considerations. And we know that our sustainability leaders and teams, just like everybody else, are overworked and don't have a lot of excess time to do work like this. But our call really is that prioritising ways in which these decisions already get made, in tech or otherwise, and integrating the sustainability consideration as part of that will absolutely pay dividends over time.
Yeah, and it's clear that organisations are passionate about sustainability. They've set their targets and they have a roadmap to be net zero or whatever that target is. But we still hear about these things around data and lack of prioritisation and all of this. Regulations are coming. So globally, we're seeing new regulations in Europe, North America, Australia even has some that will be in place very soon. Do you think this is the forcing function we need to help the prioritisation of sustainability initiatives? having fines and maybe being in the newspaper for not abiding by these could be problematic for organisations. Do you think that's a good thing for sustainability?
Yes.
Me too.
More of it, please.
Yes.
I think, I think I look at regulation as more of a stick than a carrot.
Yep.
It's the bare minimum that society in that, let's say, jurisdiction is determining as the base that everyone has to do, whether it's an individual or a business. That is a baseline. But just like any strategic business discussion goes, it's not about how do we do the bare minimum to exist. It's what are our competitors not seeing that we see? How do we make these big bets right now that might seem a little crazy to everyone else, but that will make us the best in class, first there, unremovable, indisputable market leader in 3 years' time, and we're willing to make those bets now. I think these kind of conversations, it depends on ultimately, I think what the organization deems as important and how they think about opportunities. And back to the prioritization, one thing I found is that sometimes the bigger the opportunity, the bigger you think, the bigger things happen, right? Thinking small, we say, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it's easy to say in a fear-based mind, we are so busy as a small sustainability team, we don't have time to think big. But if we took an hour every week and we dedicated it purely to think big, we can afford an hour, right? We'll have an eat-in lunch. We'll finish that process a little bit easier by asking for help from that other team. You can carve out an hour and just start giving yourself that time and that permission to think uninhibited and see what you come up with. And so those big ideas, if they're tied to addressing the company's biggest risks or seizing the biggest opportunities, that expertise that only a sustainability team have will allow them to see those sustainable opportunities long before their tech team or even their CEO. So that's the power. How do we take that expertise, think big enough, and if the idea is significant enough in business value, the higher-ups will show up.
It makes sense.
But how do we create ideas that are compelling enough to the most senior levels of the business that will cement us as a regular part of the business planning cycle, as a part of the company strategy refresh, and not just be interpreted as a standalone function that's kind of doing what they need to meet regulations. It's what strategic opportunities can the sustainability team uniquely help us enable, maybe with the help of other functions, and knowing that you have enough resources to complete the bare minimum. But regulation will always be behind the market leaders. And so back to that question, do you want to be a first mover, a fast follower, a laggard? It's okay if you choose to be knowingly behind because it is the right strategic decision. But if you're not thinking about it thoughtfully and you're moving further and further behind on things that really, really matter, wouldn't you rather find out sooner rather than later? And so they're investing that time now to think big, to really baseline, to really have those conversations across functions about why should this matter, how big can this be, and risk mitigation or opportunity seizing. I think those are the right places to start instead of getting too focused on finishing a report or responding to a certain ESG indice.
And it's clear.
Sorry, Andy. I was just going to expand on that I think the question of legislation and regulation is a really important one, and often, and yes, it is the stick, but we still have plenty of carrots, and we've tried carrots for a long time, and it's definitely time for sticks, I think, absolutely. And I love this story. It's a real life story of a senior sustainability person who had been reporting up to her board for many months that climate change and climate change disclosure was on its way. And pretty soon there's going to have to be external reporting, and that her organisation wasn't ready to do that. Just didn't have the data, all the things we've talked about today. Putting it into the board reports, putting it into the board reports, and not hitting at the board in the way that she was hoping. Out of the blue, she gets a phone call from the chairperson of the board saying, I've read in the newspaper that this new regulation's coming in, and I think our business is going to be part of it, and we're going to have to disclose from next year. And so, of course, she was very polite. And she said, oh, yes, no, yeah, well aware of that. And he said, are we ready for it? And she said, no. And as you will be not surprised to hear, we've been thinking about this and we've been trying to bring the business along to this journey, but we haven't been able to make it yet. The next call he made was to the CFO, and then following that, the CTO. And that chairperson said, we now need to galvanise ourselves together to find a solution to this data problem, this climate problem, because he was well aware that a failure to be able to meet these new legislative requirements would be very significant for his business, for the board itself, and for him personally. And it just completely changed the dial like that for months and months and months, trying to have that conversation, and then in the space of a few days things shifted. And we'd prefer it not to be that way, of course. But hopefully, with these kinds of changes being mandated and the stakes being raised so much higher for organisations, this now opens the space absolutely for the sustainability teams to have that exact type of conversation you're talking about there, where we can see sustainability leaders involved in conversations earlier and bigger scale, which will absolutely provide the opportunity to embed other sustainability considerations too.
And getting the CFO involved is a great way to get some funding, hopefully.
Always a good way. Always a good way.
I think if I could add to that, I think if you open up some of these legislations, especially the EU CSRD, and you actually look at what they're requiring, I think it's actually really good inspiration for sustainability teams, almost like a pseudo checklist to figure out if they're ahead of the game, behind the game, or just kind of meeting the game.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think TCFD was a great example, not just looking at how much emissions you want to reduce, but what is your roadmap for the next 3 years? You know, that forward looking, show me your actual plan and priorities.
Yeah.
You know, integration with risk. How are you prioritizing this as a risk across your risk management process for the wider business? You know, these components aren't just about setting targets and high-level programs. It's about being more and more crystal clear on how you're going to do it, how well you're doing it, what investments and timelines and so forth are associated with making it all happen. And so I think the great thing about regulation is not only does it push everyone to do something, but they're only getting smarter and smarter about what they're requiring, and thus giving inspiration to organizations to figure out what they really should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. So really excited for you know, TNFD to roll out, really excited to see what happens with the CSRD. I think, you know, environment has its own kind of ecosystem of frameworks aplenty.
Yes.
But I think with CSRD, we're seeing it's all of ESG.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think TNFD focusing on all the other natural impacts outside of emissions. So I think we're only going to see more and more frameworks that power regulations across the different ESG areas, but also the granularity and the specificity and the proof that organizations need to give that they're actually doing it is only going to get smarter and smarter.
Yeah.
Hiding is no longer an option.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you both so much for your presentations today. Hopefully you've inspired some people to get started on their sustainability journey and maybe set off some light bulbs on what's some really common things and challenges, simple things they can do to get started. We'll wrap it up now, but please reach out to Anne or Kathleen if you have any questions and want to learn more about what they can offer and what they're doing in this space. I'm sure they're happy to answer your questions.